Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a funny one this morning, actually. I tell you something strange, which occurred shortly before I came on air. Things like this discombobulate me slightly. I got a tweet off Mary. It said, I hope Mr. James O'B has a good rant lined up. I'm verging on several myself. Now, if you are kind enough to listen to this programme on a vaguely regular basis, you'll know that I am not unfamiliar with a style of broadcasting that could be loosely described as ranting. There are plenty of things that get my proverbial goat on an almost daily basis. Some days my goat remains ungotten. But, the political landscape in particular, the utterly unnecessary damage that's been done to the very fabric of our nation by some of the most incompetent and unpleasant politicians probably in British history, animates me almost daily. But I read that. I thought, what am I supposed to be cross about this morning? The producer and I had our customary exchange of views, and I'm not going to lie to you, there were no stories that really jumped out as being deserving of the full hairdryer treatment. So now I'm wondering what Mary is thinking of that I have so far apparently missed. Because the story, the stories that are, if you like, dominating the news agenda are strangely, well, they're not what you would call matters of state. Are they? There's a media story knocking about that you'll be familiar with. The Guardian have got a brilliant story about MPs who have shares in companies that perhaps might be affected by political decisions taken by precisely the same MPs. And then you have the coverage of George Osborne's wedding, where a woman chose to throw some orange confetti at them, uninvited, and of course the fact that it was orange. Has it actually been confirmed that it was an environmental protest? Are we sure she wasn't just a slightly eccentric maiden aunt who took it upon herself to... Well, what do you mean they're not having confetti? That's absolutely ridiculous. I haven't been to a wedding without confetti since 1959. Ergo, she took it upon herself to introduce some confetti to proceedings. She was certainly dressed for the event. It was what a strange bit of footage, which has animated, if not the country, then certainly corners of it, corners of media, and indeed social media. But I wasn't entirely sure why. I saw a lot of people opining from all sides of the political spectrum that it was particularly outrageous, particularly egregious conduct. And then I saw people popping up on Twitter to point out that according to some estimates, 330,000 excess deaths in Great Britain were linked to austerity. And George Osborne, of course, was the godfather of austerity. And then I read about judges being urged to get tough with Just Stop Oil protesters. Ministers and police chiefs, according to the Times this morning, want judges to hand down tougher sentences to deter protesters from disrupting sporting events. This would follow the disruption of Wimbledon. I think there was a game where tinsel or glitter came into proceedings. We've seen the snooker being disrupted. The cricket was disrupted as well, wasn't it? Did you see that, lad? One of the stewards at the cricket, it must have been at Lord's, mustn't it? One of the stewards at the cricket who tackled one of the protesters and got his photograph all over the media as a result, stuck it on his LinkedIn. He was a volunteer at the cricket, and he decided that would be a good opportunity to draw a little bit of attention to his search for a job. That's the kind of initiative that I think we should all admire and salute. But that's not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation is the curious juxtaposition of values, or the curious prioritisation of values. The state of the environment at the moment is, undebatable, right? We've got I know that you could ring into other shows now and go, well, why isn't China doing more? But in terms of having a conversation which involves a modicum of intelligence, the simple political prioritisation or the public prioritisation of issues, it just baffles me completely. It really does. And I'm normally, as you know, all right at working out why the sun comes up in the morning or why we're doing what we're doing or what something means. But I can't quite get my head around this. So there's two stories, isn't there? There's the little one, which is the disruption of George Osborne's wedding. And there's the big one, which is calls for courts to do more to clamp down clamp down on Just Stop Oil protesters in particular, but all protesters in general. And then there's the third question thrown up by the collision of those two, which is essentially, why do they have to do stuff like this before we talk about it? And then when we talk about it, the conversation, I'm trying not to fall into the trap that everybody else falls into, but then the conversation becomes one of two things. It's either, oh, aren't they awful? Or it's, well, yeah, you might say they're awful, but you wouldn't be talking about them if they weren't doing what they were doing. It's a really, really strange one. What's the best way into this? So, look, it's 9 after 10. Let's begin, because it's a Monday morning. It's a bit hot, and we're all recovering from the weekend. Some of us wrote 6,000 words this weekend, but, that's not necessarily a milestone that everybody had to pass. But you've got this question of, how bad was what that woman did? 0345 6060 973. This won't detain us for the whole hour, but at the end of last week, we were all talking about an astonishingly scurrilous email that had apparently been sent to everybody on the guest list for this wedding. I'm told police have now been called in to investigate alleged online harassment, and the identity of the person who sent the so-called poison pen email is apparently known to the ex-MP and his fiancée, but some people said, a friend of mine said to me when I came into work on Friday morning, said, there's no way that wedding's going to go ahead now, not after this email is doing the rounds. And I said, well, we don't know it's true, the details in it. We don't know that they're true. And we wouldn't call off the wedding. But it's amazing how quickly the world turns, isn't it? 24 hours later, everyone's talking about the fact that an unidentified woman, not affiliated with Just Stop Oil, threw some confetti at a wedding. And for the next 24 hours, nobody could talk about anything else. So let's begin with the question of that incident. What did you make of that incident? All right, it's not the most earth-shattering story we'll ever discuss, but I am in one of those rare moments when I don't quite understand what all the fuss is about, and it probably means I'm missing something. So you had people from the Labour Party, people from all over the shop queuing up to condemn this woman for throwing some confetti at a wedding. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And then we're going to have another crack at the greatest question of our time, which is this remarkable gulf between the passion and conviction of Just Stop Oil protesters and other climate protesters. And there's three people in this marriage, isn't there? There's the protesters, the passion and conviction of the protesters. There's the huge disproportionate disapproval from the media, the newspapers in particular, queuing up to condemn the protesters. I've always missed the boat slightly on the motorist constituency. It's odd for a radio presenter because so many people listen to the radio in their car that one surefire way of building up your fan base is to be, furiously cross on behalf of the motorists. And I know what it's like to be stuck in traffic, but I don't know that we've ever quite nailed that part of the audience down on this programme. But you've got that hugely disproportionate disapproval in the media. You would struggle to think of a major platform in the UK media where Just Stop Oil protesters are given the benefit of the doubt, where they begin from a position of good faith, where the cause is perhaps recognised as being so important that the tactics are secondary to the urgency of the situation they describe. It never happens, right? It never happens. And I find that a little bit odd. And then, if you're interested, then I get worried that I'm going in the other direction for sort of reasons of contrariness rather than for reasons of conviction. So you show me a story, particularly about public protest, where 90% of the UK media is all screaming abuse at the protesters rather than the people responsible for the crisis that they're protesting. And a little bit of me, my inner schoolboy, I suppose, starts pushing in the opposite direction and think, well, I better stick up for the protesters. But then I start worrying because I am a bit a bit sad like this, then I start worrying that I'm being motivated more by the sort of underdog element or the swimming against the tide element than I am by genuine sympathy for the protesters. And then I remember what they're protesting about, and I think, oh, shut up, James, get on with it. This is obviously hugely important, and no one yet has really nailed down the problem or the question of why the protests remain a bigger story than the crisis. So there it is. Why are the protests still a bigger story than the crisis? That's all I want. I don't want you to tell me about how much greenhouse gas India releases into the atmosphere or how much fossil fuel is used in China. I just want to know, because they're excuses for not caring enough. They are not reasons not to care. They are excuses for not caring. It's a crucial distinction. Why do the protests continue to attract way more attention than the crisis being protested? I still don't know. And that, I'm going to stress, is the question that I want you to answer. So if you've rung in already, thank you. It may not have got to the question that I'm actually asking yet, although there are two. Your straight-up response to the story of the woman throwing the confetti. What did you make of that? That's the shallow-end question this morning. But the deep-end question is, why do the protests continue to get so much more attention than the crisis being protested? And a few of you agreeing with me that it is, certainly from their point of view, deeply felicitous. Martin Bracknell picks up on this, that we went from discussing that scurrilous email to discussing a woman who threw some confetti at a wedding, apparently not affiliated with Just Stop Oil. It's almost like some... Listen, if you... All right, I'm not suggesting for a minute that they did this, but if I was George Osborne and I was worried about media coverage of my wedding being dominated by references to the scurrilous email which the police are investigating, I might have asked my Auntie Sue to throw some sort of Just Stop Oil flavoured confetti at us as we came out of the church. I'm absolutely 100% certain that he didn't do that, but it's all turned out rather nice for them, hasn't it? So there's two. The shallow end question, what did you think of what that woman did? 0345 6060 973. And the deep end question, the question that I should ask even more often than I do. I think it's the absence of an answer that dispirits me so much. Pause, think, answer. Why do the protests, the peaceful protests, continue to get much more coverage and attract much more negativity than the planetary crisis, from a human point of view, the existential crisis that they are protesting against? What exactly do you think about the woman who sought to disrupt George Osborne's wedding by throwing orange confetti at him and his new wife? And indeed the reaction to it, the responses to it. I'm close to a what's going on moment on that question. But much more importantly, why do protests continue to attract much more attention and disapproval than the planetary crisis that is being protested against? I hope that's not a silly question, but we'll soon find out. Alex is in Newcastle. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on again. It's absolutely not a silly question. So there's a few different strands to it as far as I can figure out. The first one is in relation to other forms of media, of not reporting on the climate crisis properly.
How do you mean?
For example, the BBC, when they said we're going to surpass this very critical 1.5 degree limit, and by 2027... there's a 98% chance that that's going to happen.
Yes.
Scientists have said that this is a huge threshold. If we pass this, we're reaching horrible conditions. They said it's just going to rain more between April and September in the UK. That's all they said. They didn't talk about crop failures. They didn't talk about
Why do you think that is?
Well, really good question. I think a lot of it is
I haven't checked. I haven't checked that your account is entirely correct. I know Roger Horrobin, the former environment correspondent, who now has a slightly different job title. I've heard him on the BBC giving chapter and verse on climate change. I've heard him going into enormous detail. So I don't know where you're deriving that analysis from. That all they talked about was rain. But you're suggesting that the BBC deliberately underreports the scale of imminent catastrophe.
Yeah, so like, for example, their documentaries are fantastic about this, but the mainstream report is just sort of treating the climate crisis as just any other issue. We talk about it once in a while, that's fine. This is the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced. We're literally talking about millions of people in the global south dying every single year, billions of people going to be affected around the world over the next 20, 30 years. This is the biggest crisis anyone has ever seen, and they're sort of treating it like another issue. So I think that's a large part of it. And then the second thing I wanted to say was about the protests in particular. If you do things that are too popular, it doesn't get reported anywhere near as much than if you do something which they can villainize you about.
Right.
So I've been thinking about this. Like, for example, Extinction Rebellion, they had 90,000 people outside Parliament Square in April.
Yes.
The biggest mass mobilization event in climate history in the UK. And yet it didn't really get anywhere near as much coverage as when people could villainize that Eddie guy from Just Stop Oil who threw powder over the snooker.
Yes.
So I think a large part of it is trying to find that balance between getting it
that's a bit
enough.
You're obviously onto something. That's a little bit. I'm thinking of it from the media perspective. So that's the difference between dog bites man and man bites dog, I think. I guess 90,000 people protesting is actually dog bites man. It's, great, it's a protest, but there's no actual news to report except it is happening, and here is the statistical number. And then there's something more sensational about the disrupting the snooker, so that moves a little bit closer to the man bites dog territory, and therefore it's not being reported differently because of a hidden agenda or because of an innate bias. I
do think there is a bit of a hidden agenda, though. I don't want to sound conspiratorial.
Don't worry.
But honestly, the climate crisis does not get reported anywhere near as much as it should, considering how big it is. Like, all of the scientists, every single person knows how bad the climate crisis is right now, right?
Yeah.
And yet, still, whenever there's wildfires in Canada or something, it still gets constantly reported as the climate crisis.
But do you know what else you've got here? I tell you what, and this is pretty grim, actually. You've got algorithms. So if the report... So this, again, I've got to stop saying chicken and egg. But it is chicken and egg. Because, again, if the public were as engaged as you are, then the media would be reporting it a hell of a lot more, because we would all be clicking on it and we would all be reading it. So that's why I reject the hidden agenda notion slightly. I grant you that impartial...
I see what you mean, James.
Organisations should be trying to sort of act more in the public interest than according to what the public is interested in. That's a crucial difference. But the climate change reporting... Hang on, let me get this out. The climate change reporting would be absolutely everywhere if people cared about it as much as you do.
Yes, I do fully agree. Obviously, it would. But I think, like, for example, if we look at the COVID-19 pandemic,
yes,
nobody really wanted to hear that much about it. Like,
they did. They did.
Forget it.
No, they did.
But ideally, we'd love to forget it. But it's the same way with the climate crisis.
No, sorry, that doesn't work. I was here. No one wanted to talk about anything else for at least the first 4 or 6 months. Not literally, no one wanted to talk about anything else.
I think the media has a responsibility to try and make it more engaging. Like, there's so many stories around the climate crisis that intersects with so many things.
Yes.
The cost of living crisis.
But I'm paid according to listeners.
I know.
If I did this every day, I would probably, even with my skill set and my magnificent callers like you, I would probably lose listeners. And then I would lose my job.
I don't think that's true. I don't think
well, I'm not going to test it just yet. That's part of the problem, isn't it?
You can relate it to other things. Like, you can talk about the cost of living crisis while also bringing up the climate crisis. You don't need to have an entire segment.
So we need to change the language, actually, change the vocabulary. And I can see that. It doesn't. I'm not going to keep talking about circles or chickens and eggs, but it is obviously the case that if everybody cared about it as much as I would say we should, then the news would be... But would it? Because you could have a week of talking about nothing else, nothing changes, you get to the second week, why are we still talking about this? Listen, if I were to draw a parallel, it would be with something like a missing person, which is going to be dominating the news agenda on Monday. But by Friday, whether the person has been found or not, it's going to be drifting down the news agenda. It was more important on the Monday than it was on the Friday. So even if we managed to get it front and centre, then it couldn't possibly stay there. But why? I love the why of it. Thank you, Alex. The perfect start. Steve's in Guildford. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, morning. Yeah, when they're attacking these sporting events, you just got to look what sport events are attacking. Wimbledon, Lords, that's where they're ruling the elite. That's their games. That's
snooker?
what they sit and watch.
Snooker?
Yeah, I think that was an easy target, but I think...
hang on a minute. I'm just suggesting it's not traditionally perceived as being up there with polo and Test cricket, is it?
No, but it's got a huge TV audience.
Yes. So that's why they did it.
That's snooker, but I think the Lords and Wimbledon was because that's the ruling elite. That's the top 70% that control all our media, all our massive companies. Most of them have probably been MPs and should have been sat in the Houses of Parliament to be watching cricket. And I think that's why they went there.
No, I'm going to disagree with you, but in a very friendly way. They went there for the same reason they went to the snooker. It's because of the TV cameras. Well,
maybe, but I'm not being... cricket's not on special telly anymore, is it? So I don't think the audience in the cricket...
No, but the footage gets on the news. The footage gets on the news.
Yeah, it does. But again, it's because... It's highlighted because of the people who sat watching it.
Well, maybe. Listen, I'm not going to fall out with you over this. I don't think you're right, but I'm perfectly happy to broadcast your view. Why do you think that the protests draw so much more attention than the actual crisis?
Well, governments can change things.
Can they?
And we can vote. We've got to vote. And, Labour Party just pulled £14 billion worth of... so really, we're up against it from day one.
Doesn't look like Labour are going to be galloping to the rescue. Depends on what coverage you read. There were reports at the weekend that Keir Starmer had said that he doesn't like or he hates tree huggers, which I need to clarify.
That's what I'm saying. They pulled their package of £14 billion, which they promised.
Yes. But they're still accused. They're still accused that the plans that are still there are unaffordable. So that's what I mean by give and take.
And if we go and have a protest like the old Poltex riots or protests, and we're all going to get arrested because they changed the law. We can't do it no more.
That's true, but the poll tax was dropped largely as a consequence of protest. Yeah. So what was different then? What was different then, Steve?
What, the poll tax?
Yeah. Why did those protests, which were often close to violent as opposed to peaceful?
Some of them were quite violent, but it was such a civil unrest. There was such bad feeling, and the government sort of was in trouble anyway. And they said, "Oh, hold on a minute," because it was
wind it in.
We just gone through the unemployment. Maggie Thatcher shutting everything down and building the Square Mile in London. And everyone thought, you know what, this is enough.
So how do you turn that then? How do you turn the climate crisis into an issue as burning? That's quite a good word to use, actually. As burning as the poll tax. How do you get people as animated by, if you like, planetary jeopardy as you did by personal financial jeopardy? Or perhaps you can't. Perhaps we're always going to care more about our immediate circumstances than we are about bigger pictures.
Well, personally, I think there's a lot of what's we're looking for. The country is protest-wise, it used to be a lot more sort of with strike action, with everything. It was a lot more straightforward and there's a lot more purpose about it. I think we've just got a little bit too soft and a little bit too settled in our lives.
Oh, well, I get complacency, and that's why
I think that's really
we're so shocked. That's a really good point. So we're so shocked by the protest now because we're so unfamiliar with the practice of protest.
We've lost how to do it. We've lost how to be radical. That's our trouble.
That's really interesting. And of course, the government are desperate to clamp down even on the bits of protest that are still permissible, the bits of protest that are still successful. Crikey, I hadn't thought of it like that. I hadn't thought of it as being towards the end of a process rather than the beginning. Steve, thank you, mate. No one yet. You're all in the deep end this morning. Isn't that interesting? I'll give you a little opportunity to have a splash about in the shallow end. What do we think of that lady that disrupted George Osborne's wedding with confetti? It's a phrase I never thought I'd say. But we're all going in on the heavier question, which is why is the protest against the crisis traditionally, historically, constantly getting way much more attention, almost all negative, than the crisis that is actually being protested? And I mean, there are links. I tell you what, net zero stuff, if you look at the think tanks and the media and the individuals who combined forces to bring about Brexit and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, they're not even pretending that the next target is attempts to avert or minimise the climate crisis. So I make of that what you will. That's going to be part of the answer. 10:35 is the time. James is in Norwich. James, what would you like to say?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's fascinating actually, James, but also exceedingly worrying. I mean, you've obviously know about the film Don't Look Up. It's
yes.
like we've got all these major stories breaking around the climate, around the destruction of nature, and yet people want to focus on, or the media want to focus on, celeb culture half the time, or some banal incident where somebody throws confetti at a wedding. I'm not really not sure.
The celeb culture's different. Celeb culture's different. That's we all love gossip. We always have. But the protest, the protest being bigger news than what is being protested. That's the bit that wrinkles the brow.
About that for a bit. So I think you sort of hit the nail on the head a little bit earlier about talking about listener numbers. But let's translate that to the likes of the Daily Mail and the Times and these big newspapers and TV stations where they're owned by the billionaires. You had Rupert Murdoch having cosy chats on the sofa this weekend with Keir Starmer because he thinks he's going to be the next Prime Minister. I mean, what is Murdoch's agenda here? He wants to maintain the status quo. He's got, obviously, investments in the fossil fuel industry.
Yes, he has got some exposure in the fossil fuel industry, but why are the readers so susceptible to this sort of manipulation? Because listen, I'm a big fan of plutocracy being blamed for an awful lot of our ills, because I think it's responsible for an awful lot of our ills. But the people listening to this programme would not continue listening if I talked about this every day, or even if I talked about it 3 or 4 times a week, and they're not being manipulated by billionaire media owners. I'm not getting instructions from upstairs to steer clear of this or steer clear of that. It just doesn't happen. So why do my listeners not want... You wouldn't either, James, to be honest, mate. We can all get on our high horse about Rupert Murdoch, and I frequently do, so please don't think I'm having a swing at you. But you wouldn't listen if it was the same topic every day, even though it's by far the most important topic that faces us as a species at the moment.
Do you think there's something about instant headlines and the need to be constantly having 24-hour news, which means we constantly need to find something else for somebody to be attracted to click on, or something else, something to be spoken about? But at the end of the day, the media do control that narrative. They have the decision to make about what they want to cover.
But we haven't stopped talking about the protests. They're going to get news all the time. I suppose that would peter out if they were successful. Well, would it though? Because it actually impacts on my life today, now. You stop me getting home after the show. You disrupt the snooker. You mess up my day out of the cricket. Only for 5 minutes. You disrupt a wedding that I'm watching on the telly. It's that you're providing news. The protests provide news. The crisis, in a sense, doesn't.
It was really interesting, I think it was last week or the week before, where some news stations, which I was listening to some of these spokespeople that come on, and they were being accused of, look, your tactics means we're only talking about your tactics and not the crisis. I think the spokespeople have been trying to say the opposite for so long. So can we get climate scientists on? I mean, John Kerry was saying on the when he spoke about what scientists are saying now, and we're in terrifying and uncharted territory. So, don't talk about the tactics. Talk about what the scientists are saying. Yeah. Get them on the news.
Well, you know that Tuesday was the world's hottest day on record, and it beat the previous hottest day on record, which was Monday. That's just last week. But I'm looking at that on literally just Googling hottest days on Earth. The Smithsonian Magazine, Today, which is, I think, the Australian programme, ABC, again in Australia, Unilad, The Washington Post, Live Science, CBS News, on a Google search in the UK, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7... the 8th story is a UK media outlet, and it's The Guardian. And then you've got another 2 more American outlets. So even there, something different is happening in the. And I'll go back to your Murdoch point. In the territories where Murdoch has influence, the stories possibly get sat on even more than they do in other countries. But this is the United Kingdom. You're searching for the hottest day. How many people listening to this right now know that last week I think we had the 3 hottest days ever recorded? Or 4 possibly.
Record's broken. Yeah.
Did you know that?
Yeah, well, absolutely, yeah. And it's
4 days in a row. Last week, the planet reached its hottest day ever recorded. But, hey, did you see that woman at George Osborne's wedding, mate?
That's incredible, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. It really is. Yeah. I wasn't even sure it was 4 days. I thought it was 3. Before you go, much more important than the climate crisis, are you familiar with Epic Studios in Norwich?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've been to a few gigs there.
Now, is it in the old Anglia studios on Magdalen Street?
That's right, yeah, down Magdalen Street.
Right.
Great venue.
Well, I've got some fantastic news for you.
Are you coming down?
I'm there on the 8th of November.
Brilliant, I'll get it in my diary.
Get yourself down. I hadn't realised it's going to be like a homecoming gig, that, for me. That was where I made my broadcasting debut, was in that studio down in Norwich. And now it's a venue, Epic Studios, November the 8th, in conversation about the new book, How They Broke Britain, which I'm now, for the first time, probably since I signed the contract, I'm now thinking might actually be finished in time, which is a pretty good feeling. But I hadn't realised. That's so exciting for me. That's where we used to do The Right Stuff with Matthew and Kate Silverton, the three of us, for about 18 months, sat there. First ever job in broadcasting. It was a sort of crossover from newspapers, and I'll be going back there. How many years later, Keith? 20-something years later? Gosh, that's nice. I'll get some invitations out. James, take care. Anna's in Leicester. Anna, what's going on?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you. I'm a big fan.
Thank you. What a lovely thing to say.
Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. I might not articulate my point.
Take your time.
Clearly.
I'm sure you'll be brilliant. Take your time. There's no rush.
I just wanted to say that I feel that climate change protesters are seen as lunatics and they're seen as tree huggers, and it's easier for people to portray them like that than to face the reality of climate change. People tend to not, on a day-to-day basis, people don't really bring up climate change in day-to-day conversations.
Do they not?
In comparison to... No, not in...
But you'd be a little bit weird if you did, wouldn't you? I don't know. I mean...
I just feel that because the science is so depressing,
yes,
and so I feel like there's a lot of climate anxiety going about. Like, for myself, I used to read up a lot about it, and I used to look at the articles, and I've got young children, so I'm really worried about their future.
Yes.
But now, mentally, I can't deal with it. And so instead, I try and avoid those articles, even though I'm fully aware of the situation we face. But I do think, when you were talking earlier about the missing person case and how, at first it's really important in the news and everyone's really interested in it, but then it loses its strength. But I feel like for the climate crisis, it's really, really important for it to continuously be in the news, because unlike the missing persons case, we can actually do something about it. And a lot of articles are very depressing, but I think there should be maybe a shift in focus on what we're actually doing that's right in terms of fighting it. I know whatever we're doing is not... Well, for example, someone doing a biodiversity project in their area and how that could be expanded, or, just people are doing
stuff.
Their own
traffic calming, but even traffic calming, attempts to reduce traffic or attempts to reduce, you get a much bigger negative response to the various ULEZ schemes up and down the country, all of which are, of course, supported by government, except the one in London, than you would to the actual urgency of the situation, the people getting late onset asthma or even, of course, dying as a consequence of pollution. People
don't want to change their way of life, and, schemes like the ULEZ scheme, I think, should be expanded to all cities. It's so important that we reduce our fossil fuel, our carbon footprints, and, we're going to have to change the way that we live. But you stopped reading the stories about that. With respect, that's... Go on. I still talk to people about it. Yeah. I've told one of my mum friends to turn on and listen. Have you? What's her name? I talked to her about climate. What's her name? Helena. Hi, Helena. I hope you're enjoying this. It's all right. It's pretty good. I get better callers than Anna. Don't judge the entire programme just on this one. I'm joking. Thank you for that. And it does matter. But you're right. You've nailed something really important there. It's the don't look up principle, isn't it? I think that James referred to the film. I can't remember whether he named it or not, but that Leonardo DiCaprio film where there's a meteor heading towards Earth, and eventually everyone just decides, let's just carry on anyway and don't look up and we'll all be fine. If you can't see it, it can't hurt you. That's kind of where we are, isn't it? Yes, definitely. A lot of the time. Anna, thank you, and thank you for bringing Helena on board. I hope we can hang on to her. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's weird, isn't it? I mean, that right there, Anna's contribution about
not apathy, but almost saturation point. And also, why will I keep reading? Why would I look up? I'm just going to get scared. That's it, exactly. She nailed it. Why would I look up? I'm just going to get scared and depressed and frightened. And what am I going to tell the children? But then you got the other bit with James, which is, do you know that last week the planet recorded the 4 hottest days on record? The 4 hottest days ever in a single week, all in the same week. But hey, look, someone threw some confetti at George Osborne on his wedding day. That bit there, right there, somewhere between those two, in the middle of that sentence, is the answer to the questions that we ask. Why are we talking about that? And we're not even talking about that. I think it's your oak tree idea, says Mark in Exeter. What's my oak tree idea? You mean, yes, the difference between aristocrats and the rest of us is that they plant trees because their great-great-great-grandson or daughter will be living in the house then, and the view will be so capable. I mean, it's not just aristocrats. Alan Titchmarsh is a truly lovely guest. Thank you for all the kind words about Alan's appearance on Full Disclosure this week. He said something really profound about just wanting to leave that bit of the planet in a better state than it was before he got here. I thought it was a really lovely thing to say. So you can think about a sort of botanical posterity, but generally speaking, you know, if you're at a stately home and you're wondering, wow, look at that view down to the lake, how did they get that? And the answer is that about 200 years before the view became perfect, someone like Capability Brown envisioned it. Anyway, that's my oak tree theory. Thank you, Matt. I thought you were crediting me with something I didn't know about. We're so used to thinking in the short term. Talking about climate change is like trying to convince frogs that they're being slowly boiled, even though they can't see it and they need to actually change their life. There is something in that, absolutely. Whereas, he goes on, this guy on the news disrupting an event, especially when sports are weirdly sacrosanct in our society, that's someone we can be scandalised by. It's easier to stir negative response than positive motivation. I wonder whether all the times we've spent talking about tabloid tactics, don't really worry about the facts or the evidence, just approach any incident or issue in the way that is guaranteed to provoke the biggest emotional reaction. You know, so you're just going to go for the biggest emotional reaction. Portray people as being feckless because it will make other people angry. Portray people as being work shy because it will make other people angry. They're swinging the lead. They're taking the mickey. They're getting stuff they don't deserve. I saw the Telegraph going after the Motability scheme this morning, a scheme which helps disabled people afford vehicles or access vehicles that they wouldn't be otherwise able to access. Just come on, flat screen TVs, come on. I wonder whether the climate change is going to be the mothership of all that kind. Already is, indeed, the mothership of all that kind of coverage. I could get you much angrier about a bloke disrupting the tennis than I can about the fact that last week the planet recorded the 4 hottest days ever. Why? Why is that? I mean, why? Why is it so much easier to get you cross about some people slowing down the traffic on the M25 than it is about the fact that the people in charge of the world, whether politicians or plutocrats, the people in charge of the world have just turned the heat up to unprecedented new levels? It's crazy. Anna's on the Isle of Wight. Anna, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Anna.
I've listened to you quite a few times, and
thank you.
So please bear with me. I'm a bit nervous.
Of course I will. Take your time.
I heartily endorse what the other Hannah said.
Yes.
I'm a bit older than her. I'm of an age to have children and grandchildren. I have neither. If I did have grandchildren, I'd be absolutely terrified for their future. I can't see them living their full life on a sustainable planet.
No.
And when I try and convey to people, they just shrug their shoulders and say, well, we've always had climate change, we've always had global warming. It's a myth, it's made up by the governments, it's this and that. And they will not.
And these are decent people. These are decent people, right? Yeah. They're not sort of
people.
Headbangers.
No, absolutely not. And it seems though they cannot or will not allow themselves to see what's happening because they'd be too frightened. And I don't have the words to convey.
Well, you go to whoever's going to tell you what you want to hear.
Mm-hmm. And it's easier to get your head around a protester or protest than it is the magnitude of what's approaching us unless something happens.
Yes.
And for something to happen, there's got to be a financial incentive. If there's no financial incentive, or they will not do it. There's no money in protecting the planet, and it's big money that rules the agenda.
That's the only hope, really, isn't it? That somehow they manage to properly turn some short-term profit from saving the planet, and then all the forces that are currently preventing us from doing so would probably weigh in behind it. How much does it animate you? Because you can understand when you describe how it makes you feel, the bleakness that you feel about the future. You can understand why people don't want to look it square in the eye, why they don't want to look up, as it were, at the approaching catastrophe.
I'm terrified.
Are you? I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm really... No, that's all right. I'm a bit like that. Was that Chicken Little? The
Chicken licking. Chicken licking. Except it's not an acorn. It's not an acorn that's landed on your head. It's See, there's an interesting thing there, Anna, because my human response to you saying you're terrified is to try to reassure you, but that's the wrong. That's the wrong response, isn't it?
Yeah. I've recently joined the Labour Party.
Oh yeah.
And to be honest with you, I'm not totally convinced. I voted Conservative all my adult life.
Okay.
And then I saw the light.
Yes.
But I don't believe that Labour have got the answers. I think it's got to be people sitting together, talking, putting their money where their mouth is.
Yes.
We've got a Prime Minister that flies everywhere he can. What's wrong with getting into a train?
I don't know.
No, I don't know. And here's this... Well, if he can fly by plane or helicopter, well, why shouldn't we?
Everybody else sees it, don't they? They see it as and similarly, celebrities getting it in the neck for flying around the place in private jets while telling everybody else to minimise. You can see, but again, it's not going to fix anything. It just makes life easier for those of us who are trying to fly the flag or trying to do the right thing. If other people saying that everyone else should do the right thing would do the right thing themselves. Just for your own reassurance, I think Ed Miliband's on side on this. He seems to be a fairly visionary environment politician, but reports this weekend were that he'd failed to impress upon Keir Starmer how important it is to do the things that you would like to see the Labour Party doing. It's a strange time. Starmer's so frightened of exciting precisely the forces that are currently holding us back from properly addressing climate change, the sort of media plutocracy crossover, the increasing danger of him never getting his hands out of his pockets. Thank you, Anna. I don't know what you were nervous about. You played an absolute blinder. I look forward to your next call. Ruben is in Liverpool. Ruben, what would you like to say? Ruben?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
What happened then?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. What happened then? No, it's phone line's weird. The delay's too long on the phone line. Sorry, we'll try and fix it. Janet's in Godalming. Janet, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Janet.
I'm also terrified.
Why is everyone terrified? I'm a pussycat. Have you never heard the show? Have you not seen the clips on YouTube? I'm a pussycat, Janet.
No, I love your show.
Thank
I
you.
listen a lot. You're very right about Ed Miliband as well.
I hope so.
Shame he's not the leader anymore, right?
Oh, we had our chance.
I've been terrified about the ecological crisis, which is obviously hand in hand with the climate crisis, since I was about 10. I'm now 58.
Gosh.
I remember asking my mum where all the little plastic pots of the yoghurts I was addicted to went,
Yes.
and she said, they go in the bin. I said, I know they go in the bin, but after the bin. And she said, well, they buried them. And I did a few sort of homespun experiments and worked out it wasn't going anywhere. Anyway, long story short...
You're quite an early adopter, as they say, weren't you?
Well, I didn't really get active until XR burst onto the scene, and I suddenly thought, wow, all these worries that were buried about, I worked out that nothing we were doing really was sustainable, but I hadn't articulated it, and suddenly, bang. So anyway, it's interesting, your other two callers, the two Annas, I feel their terror and grief, and I'm just going to say a really good way of channeling that is not necessarily to go and glue yourself to stuff, but there are so many groups springing up now, not necessarily activist groups, but in our town, in Surrey, there's a climate emergency group, and they go and have a vegan supper every Friday night and just talk.
And that helps?
I think it does.
Yeah, just getting so slowly, baby steps, spreading the word. I mean, all three of you have possibly cracked it, in a sense, because if you... I don't want to feel bleak and terrified. And so possibly one starting point when you're not talking to people who've already arrived at a similar place, a similar conclusion, we have to find a way of having the conversation that doesn't make me want to turn it off. Do you see what I mean? I mean, that's why the don't look up analogy is so powerful, because if you don't look up, you can pretend it's not happening. And the person who's shouting at you all the time that it is happening, the temptation to tune him or her out is obviously, for millions of people, and in some sense for all of us to varying degrees, the temptation is irresistible.
Find your tribe. Find the people who care. Get together with them, because there's strength in community.
And
after all, and if a collapse comes, we're left with our community, and after that, our smallest unit, and our family.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to say was we did 2 days of campaigning at Wimbledon about Evian, who are owned by Danone, who are being taken to court by Client Earth as being one of the global plastics polluters. They have a very inadequate plan to deplastify. And we sent press releases to 50 newspapers. And we called you guys, actually. We called your newsroom, and no one was interested.
Nothing
and I
happened,
think it's
because you weren't doing anything. You weren't doing anything disruptive.
There was no glue involved, James.
Yeah, but that's so...
confetti.
Good Lord.
So, I'm not saying that my next move is to go and shut down the M25, but I can see where the frustration comes from other
also
activists.
because you're so correctly persuaded by the power of the evidence you've collected, you can't quite understand why it's not impressing people in my industry. You'd say, no, look, if we don't do this, then this will happen, and look, here's the science, here's the evidence, here's the detail, here's the fact, and everyone's like, oh, look over there, someone just threw some confetti at George Osborne.
Exactly. We did end up on live Turkish television on TRT World. They're a global news station, and they broadcast us from just outside Wimbledon last night, which was, something.
Why? Why did they to pick it up, and not, why? Do you know why they picked it up and others didn't?
They do a brilliant weekly program called Just 2 Degrees,
Really?
which is I really recommend it actually to people. It's,
in Turkish?
Really in depth. No, it's all in English language. It's a global news channel called TRT World. I'm just plugging them a bit.
No,
don't worry, I don't work for them. I'm a teacher.
No, you can plug them if you want. That's fine. I mean, Turkey, very state-controlled Turkish media, but that's obviously swimming in the right direction.
This channel is really good on covering climate and ecological stories. They pull out some quite obscure stuff. And I'm glad it was in English, because I thought if it was in Turkish, unless you've got some Turkish, Jan, they might have been taking the mickey out of you or using you as a sort of example of colour at Wimbledon, But obviously the programme is dedicated to drawing attention to what you describe, and the media, up to and including the mighty LBC, was left entirely unmoved by your press release. And yet, if you'd glued yourself to Novak Djokovic, then you'd have been all over the news. So you can see the frustration. That's a perfect illustration of the frustration, actually. Thank you.